Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 11th of August of 2026. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where the Russians during the previous 24 hours have improved their positions significantly. And first let's talk about the Kharkiv direction, because this direction is becoming the most dynamic direction through the entire front line. First let's talk about the northern Kharkiv direction, where the Russians, according to the group of forces north and according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, have improved their positions significantly. The Russians have captured the settlement of Sherbakovka, which is located right exactly through this territory. And these are the changes on the ground between the dates. So, for example, this is the end of the 10th of August of 2026, and this is already the end of the 11th of August. The Russians started the battle for the settlement of Kazachia Lopany a long time ago, but it seems that the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation by introducing additional reinforcements and reserves. And now the Russians were forced to change their plans and to finish offensive operation further in the direction of the city of Kharkiv through the villages of Kudiyivka, Goptovka and Takarivka. It seems that Russians right now are going to continue advancing further towards the settlement of Tsupovka with one purpose: to cut the settlement of Kazachia Lopany from supply and support. If Russians are able to take these territories under complete control, then the Ukraine's logistics through the settlement of Kazachia Lopany would be disrupted, and the Ukrainians would be forced to support their contingent only through the settlement by the name of Zolochev, using these roads to supply the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine. And if Ukrainians begin using this road, of course, only this road, of course, the Russians will be able to use their drones to cut the logistics and to attack vehicles and unmanned vehicles supporting the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the village of Kazachia Lopany. So this is the situation in this area, but we see that the Russian offensive operation develops not very fast, which means that this direction is not a primary direction for Russians. The main purpose probably of this direction is to force the Ukrainians to keep additional reserves through the city of Kharkiv and not to use them through the most northeastern parts of the Kharkiv direction, where the Russians during the previous 10 days have improved their positions significantly. So once again, let's talk about this direction. Today we have changes, as you can see, and the changes are very important. For example, this is the map on the end of the 10th of August of 2026, and here we can see the number of the territories that were taken by Russians just within the previous 10 days, between the basically 29th of July and the 9th of August of 2026. During this period of time, the Russians managed to break through Ukraine's defenses in the area of the settlement of Bielye Kolodys, and this big settlement was taken by Russians. As you can see, there are a lot of very important facilities. Most of them were reduced to ruins during the assault operation, but it seems that something was saved. There are tree lines, facilities, building, basements, and obviously the Russians would be able to use this city to support their offensive operation further in the southern direction. Furthermore, there are railways, as you can see. As for now, these railways don't work. Neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are able to use them, but obviously if the Russians are able to move the front line further in the southern direction, sooner or later they would be able to restore the connections between the city of Belgorod and the line of combat contact, or at least with the city of Volchansk, which would reduce the Russia's logistic probably costs and expenses. So the Russians continue offensive, and these days the Russians are just with one mission: to take under complete control, or to encircle first of all the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine through the most northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. We're talking about these territories. We're not talking about thousands of soldiers, probably up to 1,000 soldiers are there, and the Russians during the previous 24 hours improved their positions through the settlement of Chorna. And these are the changes on the ground between the dates. So this is the end of the 10th of August, and here we can see the progress of Russians between 29th of July and the 10th of August of 2026. And here we have additional changes through the most eastern parts of the settlement of Chorny. The Russians entered the settlement and began advancing along tree lines. And currently, the distance between edge positions of Russians between the villages of Ivanovka and Chorny is already less than 15 kilometers, more precisely 13 kilometers and 630 meters. And this is already not a distance for drones and for artillery. Now the Russians are tasked just with one simple thing. The Russians are going to continue advancing along this road from the settlements of Zakharovka and Ivanovka, furthermore in the direction of the settlement of Vasilievka, and the Russians are going to continue advancing from the villages of Anishina, Ivashina, Ustinovka towards the settlement of Chorny. So Russians will try to take under complete control this belt of settlements, which is located to the south of the most northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. If Russians take this belt of settlements under complete control, then of course the Ukrainians who are currently located in this pocket would be caught by the Russians in CAULDRON without any chances for evacuation. Most likely the Ukrainians in coming days from the area of the settlement of Veliki Burluk will try to redeploy additional reinforcements and reserves with the purpose to stabilize the situation and to save control over this corridor, because if Ukrainians are not able to save control over the corridor, then we will see another cauldron through the northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. The main problem for the Ukrainian side is that we discussed this yesterday, the gap between the settlement of Veliki Burluk and Pechenegi Reservoir. 32 kilometers up to 33 kilometers between these two strategical points, which means that the Russians have an operational space to develop their offensive operation further in the southern direction, and if Russians are able to continue advancing further in the southern direction, they would be able to outflank the settlement of Veliki Burluk from the west and from the southwest, and this can lead to another cauldron. And I expect that these days we might see additional offensive operation from the Russian side, from the area of the settlement of Dvorechna in the northwestern direction towards the settlements of Shupatova and Seredny Burluk. So the Russians may try to begin offensive operation in this area with the purpose to increase the pressure on positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through the settlement of Veliki Burluk, just with one purpose: to pin down the armed forces of Ukraine and to create an attempt to take these territories also under complete control and to encircle the settlement of Veliki Burluk without being involved in heavy street fightings. So as we discussed during the previous videos, the northeastern front line, the northeastern Kharkiv front line has collapsed completely. Now the only thing that Ukrainians are able to do is to win some time with heavy losses. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. These days we don't have lots of updates from this territory, and during the previous 24 hours small changes were recorded through the northwestern parts of the city of Kupiansk. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see lots of strikes that were carried out by the Ukrainians through this part of the settlement. So we received another confirmation that the Russians have a strong control over the settlement and that the Russians continue developing their positions through the city itself. And the city of Kupiansk is a very big city. Telling the truth, I believe that the map that you can see right now in front of your screens has nothing common with the reality. I believe that the Russians have stronger control. We just haven't received proofs about this. And the battle for the city of Kupiansk ended lots of many months ago. Probably 2 or 3 months ago the battle finished, and all these days, all these months and weeks, the Russians were developing their positions, they were installing additional equipment, they were developing infrastructure. So the Russians were preparing themselves before the beginning of the major battle for the eastern Kharkiv direction, because when the Russians are ready, obviously they will continue offensive operation both in the western direction towards the settlement of Shevchenkova and in the southern direction towards the settlement of Izum, with the purpose to cut this strategical elevation from the mainland. As for the Barova direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. We see that both the Russians and the Ukrainians continue keeping this situation in this area in a secret. There are very heavy clashes. The Russians continue advancing, especially along the line between the settlements of Sosnovo, Alexandrovka, Korovy Yar, Karpovka, and the pro-Russian sources reported that slowly but step by step the Russians continue advancing further in the northwestern direction, but as you can see, we have no changes. There are lots of Ukrainian units, and we have lots of videos where we might see how the Russians were attacking equipment of the armed forces Ukraine. The Ukrainians are trying to hold this foothold on the Russian side of the river of Seversky Donetsk Skol at without calculating costs. So, which means that this territory is very important for the Ukrainians, especially when talking about the city of Liman. And as for the city of Liman, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. It's very difficult to understand what exactly is happening here. The only thing we have is additional batch of videos published by pro-Russian sources of how the Russians were attacking the territory of the city of Liman and the territory around with aviation. As for the Slaviansk direction, the Russians continue sending infiltration groups towards the settlement of Nikolaevka with the purpose to find weak points in Ukraine's defense and with the purpose to infiltrate forces as deep as possible towards the city of Slaviansk itself. The main battle for the city of Nikolaevka hasn't started yet, but we expect that this battle may start very soon. As for the Kramatorsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we also haven't received anything on the matter of additional changes, but since the beginning of the battle for the city of Kramatorsk, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly on the Ukraine side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. We're talking about all these villages. The Russians continue improving their positions through this area. Now the Russians most likely are tasked with this dense network of the fortifications between the settlements of Maiska and Vasyutinska. We're talking about these trenches. The Russians right now most likely are trying to take these territories under complete control, and basically if it happens and when it happens, we can say that the battle for the city of Kramatorsk begins, because from these positions the Russians have probably a direct way, strict road to attack the Kramatorsk airfield. We're talking about this heavy fortified territory, and if Ukrainians lose control over the Kramatorsk airfield, this is going to be basically the end, probably not even the beginning, but the end of the Donbas Arc final battle. The Ukrainians use lots of vehicles through this territory, and during the previous 24 hours we received lots of videos how the Ukrainians were using unmanned drones, unmanned transport vehicles to support their forces along the line of combat contact, but the Russians use hundreds of drones, maybe even thousands of drones every second over the Slaviansk-Drushkovka agglomeration, and the Russians destroy everything they see. So the situation here is quite complicated for the armed forces of Ukraine. The Russians use everything they have with the purpose to take the Slaviansk-Drushkovka agglomeration as fast as possible. The city of Konstantinovka and the territory around. During the previous 24 hours, pro-Ukrainian sources published lots of videos where we can see how Ukrainians using FPV drones and artillery were attacking edge positions of Russians. One of these attacks took place through the settlement, through the micro-district of Novoselovka. Two more attacks took place between the territories of settlement Stenki and Nikolaevka. These attacks confirmed that the Russians continue their offensive operation with the purpose to cut the pocket between Chervona and Podolska. As you can see, according to this territory has lots of trenches, lots of strongholds, lots of fortifications, one of the most fortified territory through the Drushkovka, Slaviansk direction. And of course, if Russians take this territory under complete control, we're talking about this pocket. Of course, the Russians first of all would be able to improve their positions significantly. The second thing, the Russians would be able to receive probably straight lines between Chasiv Yar, Konstantinovka. It will improve logistics, and the Russians will be able to receive positions to accumulate forces before moving further. And of course, the Russians would continue offensive operation along railways. And if the Russians will continue doing this, this is another road to attack the city of Kramatorsk, but this time from the south. The settlement of Dobropolye, a very important settlement, and the thing is that the Russian parliament elections are going to start very soon, and it seems, and it is obviously, that the Russians would try to take the Dobropolye agglomeration under complete control before elections. The Russians would try to use this victory to probably boost the main party of Russia, which is located in the parliament. So that is why we expect that within the next 3 weeks the battle for Dobropolye would be finished. The Russians, most likely in coming days, would begin publishing lots of videos with flags through the settlement, trying to confirm and convince everyone that the city is under complete control. Of course, the Ukrainians would publish videos from their side confirming that the city of Dobropolye still remains under complete Ukraine control. So that's why we are going to see a very big and heavy media battle for the city in coming 2-3 weeks. But the Russians indeed are tasked to finish the battle for this territory, as the Ukrainians are tasked to hold the city for as long as possible. According to these videos, we see that the Russians began assault on the western Dobropolye stronghold. We're talking about these buildings. As you can see, there are lots of multi-story buildings, and this is the last citadel of the city of Dobropolye. If Ukrainians lose control over this part of the settlement, this is going to mean the end of the battle for the Dobropolye agglomeration itself, and this is going to mean that the Russians enter the operational space of the Dnipropetrovsk and Pavlograd regions. Meanwhile, the Russians continue attacking gas stations in this area, trying to cut the logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine as much as possible. Now let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded as well. The Russians, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, the units of the Group of Forces East, published this video where we can see how the battle for the settlement of Nova Polya was taking place. The Russians, according to different sources, established complete control over the territory, which means that most likely the Russians created another cauldron through the special military operation conflict zone. The Russians encircled Ukrainians in this area along the river by the name of Gaichul. There are lots of villages in this area. The Russians improved their position significantly, and currently the distance between edge positions of Russians between the villages of Blagodatna and Novopolye is already less than 3 kilometers, which is already nothing, even for short arms fighting and fire. Furthermore, today we received a very interesting video published by pro-Ukrainian sources. Today, Ukrainian soldiers of the 121st Territorial Defense Brigade published this video where they were asking for help. It's something like an open list to the current commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Drapati. They were asking him, they were demanding, asking him to make rotation, to bring water, food, because they say they don't have water, they don't have anything, and they are completely encircled. So, which means that I believe that when this video was published, of course, nobody revealed positions of these units of the 121st Defense Brigade. One thing is clear, that they are located somewhere here, and most likely they are located in this area, either in the area of the river of Gaichul that the Russians managed to encircle according to pro-Russian sources, or in the area between the cities of Orekhov and Malotokmachka. We're talking about this pocket because the Ukrainians, according to the configuration of this map, were also encircled through these territories. So one of these pockets, the 121st Brigade, is located in one of these pockets, and today they published a video demanding support from the Ukraine's military authorities, and they basically they issued an ultimatum saying that if there is no support, then they will leave their positions. So, which means that in coming days, either the Ukrainians will fix this issue and they will start supporting them, but for these purposes, the Ukrainians need to organize a counter-offensive operation, either in the direction of the settlement of Mao-Takmachka or in the direction of the settlement of the river of Gaichul. And of course, this counteroffensive, at the beginning of this counteroffensive, doesn't mean that the Ukrainians are able to get results and to unblock the encircled contingent, which means that the price could be too big, and which means that local part, small part of the Zaporozhye front line may collapse in coming days, and the Russians may develop their positions significantly between the cities of Orekhov and Pokrovsk. And even a small adjustment, even a small development of Russians in this area may lead to unpredictable consequences to the entire city of Zaporozhye itself. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians continue bringing additional forces to the line of combat contact from the city itself. The Russians control the road. As you can see in this video, the Russians almost every single day ambush more and more vehicles and forces trying to get the cities of Orekhov and Pokrovsk, and the Russians attack everything they see. This is how the Russians are trying to soften defenses of Ukrainians along the contact line. And when talking about the city itself, the Russians continue pummeling the city with aviation, with missiles. During the previous 24 hours, more than 10 ballistic missiles struck the city. Lots of explosions were recorded, and the sources reported that the Russians were attacking these territories. As you can see, there are lots of buildings that could be used by the Ukrainians for military purposes. As you can see, for this territory, at least 2 buildings were already destroyed, and the Russians continue attacking this industrial zone of the city of Zaporozhye, trying to reduce Ukraine's logistics capabilities. As for the Odessa and Kherson direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received many updates. Probably the most important video is coming from the city of Kherson, where we can see how Russians continue using the very heavy bombs like FAB 3000 attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, but without changes on the ground. Another important thing worth attention is that during the previous 24 hours, lots of attacks and explosions were recorded through the city of Rovna, which is located in the western parts of Ukraine. A warehouse was destroyed, and this video was published by locals. As you can see, the Russians intensified their attacks through the most northwestern parts of Ukraine. As for the end of the 11th of August of 2026, there is just one part of Ukraine probably where the Russians didn't attack using so many missiles and drones, and we're talking about this one. The Russians didn't attack the northwestern parts of Ukraine as well, but starting 2026, the Russians intensified their attacks through these territories. We believe that the Russians will develop their attacks through this area just with one purpose: to destroy gas stations, warehouses, everything through this territory during the next stages and next days of the special military operation. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence